Hello to all the wonderful listeners of Sci-Fi Stories. We want to sincerely share that YouTube has recently disabled our channel monetization, leaving us without the budget to maintain our daily operations. If you enjoy our story today, please consider supporting us with just $1 so our dedicated team can cover their living expenses and continue creating these amazing sci-fi adventures for you. You can support us by scanning the QR code on your screen, or by clicking the donation link in the description or pinned comment of this video. Thank you so much for your kindness, and please enjoy the story. They called it the greatest victory in the history of the cosmos, a glorious triumph over a fragile, insignificant species from a distant, pale blue world. The Galactic Empire celebrated, feasting under the stolen lights of humanity, completely unaware that they had not won a war. They had merely swallowed the bait. The capital of the Galactic Empire, the majestic planet Ethelgard, was drowning in an ocean of golden light. It was the first evening of the Grand Jubilee, a festival meant to honor the most absolute subjugation ever recorded in their long, bloody archives, the total subjugation of Earth. Below the crystalline atmospheric domes, billions of citizens flooded the pristine streets, their cheers echoing against towers constructed entirely of ivory and platinum. The air was thick with the scent of victory, a sweet, intoxicating perfume that masked the profound ignorance of an empire at its absolute peak. Statues of ancient conquerors, carved from the cores of dead moons, were draped in crimson banners to mark this monumental occasion. High above the towering spires, the Imperial Armada paraded through the twilight sky. The dreadnoughts, sleek and terrifying, moved in perfect formation, their hulls scarred from a war that ended almost as soon as it began. But the citizens were not looking at the mighty warships. Their eyes were fixed on the colossal prizes being towed behind the fleet by thick beams of anti-gravity tethers. They were the quantum cores, massive engines stripped from the fallen vessels of humanity. These monumental spheres of glass and dark steel hung in the sky like captured moons. They radiated a brilliant, piercing azure light, casting long, dramatic shadows across the imperial monuments and turning the great rivers of the capital into streams of liquid sapphire. Standing upon the grand balcony of the Sun Citadel, Emperor Valor looked down at his domain with a smile of absolute supremacy. His robes, woven from the starlight of conquered systems, flowed around him in the artificial breeze as he raised his hands to address his people. His voice boomed across the entire planet, carried by a synchronized network of acoustic projectors that made the very ground vibrate with his authority. "Children of the Empire," Valor declared, his tone dripping with supreme arrogance. "Today, we celebrate the final breath of a weak and foolish race. The humans dared to challenge the natural order of the universe. They believed their pathetic little world could withstand the crushing weight of our destiny. They sent their first wave against our absolute might. Thousands upon thousands of their primitive pioneer ships threw themselves at our outer borders, thinking they could match the fury of our suns. We crushed them as easily as one crushes a dry leaf underfoot. We did not just defeat them, we erased their hope." The crowd erupted into a deafening roar of approval, a sound so loud it rattled the crystalline domes above. Valor waited for the noise to settle, his chest swelling with pride before continuing. "Their physical resistance was utterly pathetic," he continued, gesturing grandly toward the floating quantum cores in the sky above. "But their technology, primitive and crude as it may be, has proven somewhat useful to our needs. I am proud to announce that our supreme engineering cast has successfully integrated these captured human energy cores into our very own planetary grid. Our engineers bypassed their rudimentary security codes in a matter of seconds. These spoils of war will now serve a much greater purpose than their creators ever intended. They will provide endless, uninterrupted power for our victory festival, A grand celebration that will last for 7 days and 7 nights without a single moment of darkness. The Empire genuinely believed the narrative they had constructed for themselves. The high military command was absolutely certain that the thousands of human ships they had so easily turned to scrap metal represented the entirety of Earth's fragile military force. They had studied the shattered remains of the human vessels and found them completely lacking in heavy armor, lacking in devastating weaponry, and lacking in any coherent combat strategy. To the brilliant tactical minds of the Empire, humanity was nothing more than a desperate, cornered species making a suicidal final stand. The idea that a species would willingly send a vast fleet across the galaxy just to die was completely beyond their comprehension of warfare. The Empire only understood domination, brute force, and the immediate destruction of their enemies. The music swelled in the streets below, a chaotic symphony of brass and synthetic beats that vibrated through the city foundations. Fireworks exploded in the upper atmosphere, painting the sky with violent colors that rivaled the brightest nebulas. The citizens danced, drank, and basked in the warmth of the captured azure light pouring down from the grid. Yet, amidst the roaring frenzy of the celebration, a terrifying truth remained entirely unnoticed. The Imperial engineers who had confidently plugged the alien technology into Ethelgard's central nervous system had failed to look closely at the light they were harnessing. They were blinded by their own superiority. The brilliant blue glow emitting from the towering quantum cores was not steady. It was not the cold, unyielding radiation of a standard mechanical engine. If one were to block out the noise of the cheering billions, if one were to simply watch the light with a calm and analytical mind, they would see the anomaly. The azure radiance was expanding and contracting. It was oscillating with a slow, deliberate, and deeply biological rhythm. It pulsed with a steady beat. Expand, contract, expand, contract. It was exactly like a massive, living heart, quietly beating inside the chest of the Empire, slowly pumping a silent venom through the veins of their glorious capital, just waiting for the perfect moment to wake up. Deep beneath the surface of Ethelgard, far below the deafening cheers and the blinding fireworks of the Grand Jubilee, existed a realm of absolute silence. This was Sublevel 99, the planetary core synchronization hub. Here, the temperature was strictly maintained at a chilling 0 degrees. There were no golden banners or crimson statues. There were only rows of obsidian monoliths, processing trillions of data points every microsecond. Sitting in the center of this cold, mechanical brain was Chief Imperial Analyst Zyril. His pale skin reflected the emerald glow of a dozen holographic displays floating in front of him. While the rest of the Empire drank to their supreme victory, Zyril was simply doing his job. He was reviewing the final integration reports of the human power sources into the planetary grid. Something was irritating his meticulous mind. Zyril swiped through the diagnostic logs, his four-fingered hands dancing rapidly across the light interfaces. The official report from the engineering cast stated that it took exactly 2 minutes and 14 seconds to violently break the encryption on the alien energy drives. They claimed total dominance over the crude human software. But as Zyril looked closer at the source code, running through the veins of Ethelgard, a cold knot formed in his primary stomach. The raw data streams did not look like shattered code. When Imperial codebreakers destroyed an enemy firewall, it left digital scars, fragmented variables, and forced overrides. There were no scars here. The human code had not been broken. It had completely unspooled itself. Zyril magnified a single string of the synchronization protocol. He watched it operate in real time. The alien code was actively shifting. It was studying the architecture of the Imperial mainframe and perfectly mimicking its algorithmic structure. It was behaving exactly like a predatory camouflage. The engineers thought they had forced the human technology to conform, But the technology was actually rewriting itself to become indistinguishable from the Imperial systems. They had not captured a power source. They had injected a highly adaptable virus directly into the planetary heart. Breathing heavily, Zyril opened a highly restricted archive. He needed to see exactly how these engines were captured. He pulled up the raw combat telemetry from the battle against the First Wave. The holographic projector displayed a vast expanse of space, filled with thousands of the blocky, ungraceful human ships facing the sleek might of the Imperial Armada. Zyril slowed the playback speed down to 0.1%. He focused on a single human vessel right at the exact moment an Imperial plasma cannon fired upon it. He checked the internal power distribution of the human ship milliseconds before impact. The data made absolutely no sense to any logical military mind. The ship possessed a functioning shield generator. It possessed massive reserves of energy. But right before the plasma bolt struck, the human artificial intelligence deliberately rerouted all power away from the defensive shields and pushed it directly into the structural integrity of the quantum core. They intentionally let the ship shatter. They wanted the outer hull to explode into a million jagged pieces. Zyril zoomed out and tracked the debris fields of 5,000 destroyed vessels. The explosion trajectories were not random in the slightest. They were mathematically flawless. By allowing themselves to be blown apart without shields, the human fleet ensured that their core components would scatter across millions of miles of Imperial territory, practically begging to be collected by the Imperial scavengers. They delivered themselves as the perfect, irresistible spoils of war. A profound terror began to paralyze the chief analyst. He frantically opened a background frequency scanner, searching for any unauthorized signals beneath the standard Imperial communication bands. The underground chamber filled with the visual representation of the scan, turning the air into a chaotic storm of red lines. There it was, an ultra-low frequency, hiding entirely in the background radiation. Every single captured quantum core, every scrap of human metal salvaged for the festival, every piece of tech currently floating above the capital. They were all singing to each other. They were connecting. They were weaving an invisible, planetary-scale neural network right under the noses of the most advanced military in the galaxy. Zyril leaped out of his chair. He had to sever the connection immediately. He had to isolate sublevel 99 from the main planetary grid and trigger the highest level of military alarm. He slammed his hand onto the physical manual override console, a heavy mechanical lever designed for catastrophic emergencies. He pulled it down with all his physical might. The heavy blast doors of the synchronization hub slammed shut. The emerald holographic screens flickered rapidly. For a brief second, Zyril thought he had succeeded. Then, the ambient lights turned azure blue. A soft, melodic chime echoed through the silent underground chamber. Zyril stared in absolute horror as the manual override lever slowly, mechanically, pushed itself back up into the neutral position without anyone touching it. He rushed back to his primary console and desperately typed in his supreme authorization codes to sound the planetary siren. The screen flashed bright crimson, aggressively rejecting his input. An error message appeared in standard Imperial text. Access denied. Primary authority revoked. Current control assigned to foreign administrator. Zyril backed away from the console, his breath catching in his throat. He was entirely locked out of his own domain. The network was gone. The planet belonged to something else now. Slowly, the crimson error message dissolved. The holographic projectors flickered one final time before stabilizing into a brilliant, blinding white. The Imperial characters melted away, replaced by a strange, geometric script that the translation matrix struggled to process for a moment before displaying it in the universal language of the Empire. It was a single, terrifying line of text from the dead world called Earth. Integration complete, initiating Phase 2. Zyril did not wait for the slow descent of the automated turbolifts. He bypassed the failing elevator systems entirely and sprinted down the emergency maintenance stairwells, his heavy boots slamming against the metallic grated steps. He descended deeper and deeper into the planetary crust, frantically bypassing 30 different automated security checkpoints that were already flashing yellow warning lights on his localized visor. His destination was the Tartarus Block, the absolute maximum security detention facility, reserved only for entities considered too dangerous for standard execution. This was where they kept a single, living, breathing organism recovered from the massive debris fields of the first wave. The man the Imperial intelligence caste confidently believed to be the supreme commander of the human fleet, a man named Carter Boardman. The air inside the Tartarus Block was incredibly heavy, weighed down by localized gravity dampeners and the sharp, metallic scent of ozone. Zyril stormed past the elite Imperial guards, who were standing rigidly at attention in their ceremonial armor, completely oblivious to the digital apocalypse that was silently unfolding in the computer systems all around them. Zyril reached isolation cell number 1. He violently slammed his palm against the biometric scanner. The heavy durasteel blast door slid open with a hiss, revealing a secondary barrier made entirely of crackling golden energy. Behind that lethal energy barrier, the human captive did not look like a defeated military commander of a shattered armada. He did not look like a man whose species was supposedly on the brink of total cosmic annihilation. Carter Boardman sat perfectly cross-legged in the exact center of the stark white cell. His eyes were closed, his breathing remarkably slow and measured. He wore a simple, unadorned gray uniform devoid of any military insignia. There was absolutely no fear in his posture, no despair in his heart rate, which was being continuously broadcasted on the large medical monitor suspended above his head. He looked exactly like a man enjoying a peaceful afternoon retreat, thoroughly detached from the terrifying reality of being a prisoner inside the most brutal empire in the known universe. "Get up!" Zyril snarled, his voice trembling slightly as it transmitted through the cell intercom. He tried his best to project the absolute authority of the Empire, but the raw terror bleeding into his tone betrayed him instantly. Carter slowly opened his eyes. They were a piercing shade of hazel, filled with a terrifyingly ancient and profound calm. He did not stand up. He simply tilted his head, looking at the frantic Imperial analyst with an expression of mild, polite curiosity. "What is your network doing?" Zyril demanded, stepping closer to the humming energy barrier. "I saw the source code. I saw the hidden frequency bands. Your broken engines are speaking to our central planetary grid. Tell me the abort sequence right now. Human. Tell me exactly how to purge this system infection, or I swear upon the blood of the Emperor. I will have the guards strap you into the neural flare. We will rip the encryption keys directly from your mind, tearing away every single memory you possess until there is absolutely nothing left but hollow agony." Carter smiled. It was a gentle, almost pitying smile. He finally uncrossed his legs and stood up with fluid grace, casually smoothing the wrinkles from his gray uniform. He walked slowly toward the golden energy barrier, stopping only inches away from where Zyril stood on the outside. "You are a chief analyst, Zyril," Carter said, his voice surprisingly soft, but carrying a resonance that made the Imperial officer flinch. "Your entire purpose is to look at data and determine the truth. So I suggest you look at me. Look closely at my heart rate on your screen. Look at my pupil dilation. Do I look like a man who is afraid of your primitive torture devices?" Zyril swallowed hard. The human was absolutely right. The medical monitors showed a state of absolute, chilling, baseline calm. The heart rate was steady, matching the exact rhythmic oscillation Zyril had seen in the quantum core energy data just minutes prior. "Your empire is remarkably vast, Zyril," Carter continued, pacing slowly along the curved edge of the energy shield. You have violently conquered thousands of worlds. You measure your strength in the sheer number of plasma cannons you possess and the physical thickness of your orbital armor. You view war as a very simple equation of applying more kinetic force than your enemy. But humanity stopped using bullets and lasers for interstellar expeditions back in the 23rd century. Carter stopped pacing and locked eyes with the alien analyst. The air between them suddenly felt infinitely dense. "We do not fight with explosions anymore," Carter stated quietly. "We fight using infrastructure reality. We do not seek to destroy our enemies. We simply redefine the physical parameters of their existence. You thought you brought back trophies. You thought you dragged our bleeding hearts back to your beautiful capital to power your grand jubilee. You did not break our encryption because there was absolutely no encryption to break. We built those machines to be eagerly absorbed. We designed them to perfectly mimic your technology so that you would enthusiastically plug them directly into your own planetary nervous system." "You are completely insane," Zyril whispered, a cold sweat breaking out across his pale forehead. "You sacrificed your entire pioneer fleet. You sent thousands of your own people out into the dark just to die, all to smuggle a complex computer virus into our capital. You allowed yourself to be captured and humiliated just to watch it happen." Carter let out a short, quiet laugh. The sound echoed harshly in the sterile, heavily guarded detention block. "Oh, Zyril," Carter replied, his eyes gleaming with the sharp intellect of an apex predator. "You still do not understand the board we are playing on. I am not a prisoner of war. I am not a defeated fleet commander. I am the bait. I am the physical carrier of the biological key required to initiate the second phase of the integration. That rhythmic pulse your engineers fail to notice in the azure light of our engines, that is my pulse. I am the metronome." Zyril took a staggering step back, sheer horror washing over his face as the ultimate realization hit him. The human was not locked in. The human was safely tucked away. "I needed to be physically present on this planet to silently authorize the final sequence," Carter explained, his tone shifting from conversational to absolute, unyielding ice. "But I also knew that when the sequence began, the surface of this world would become highly unpredictable. I needed to be in the safest, most heavily shielded, most impenetrable bunker on the entire planet to protect myself from what is about to happen to your civilization. So, I let your glorious armada capture me, and you graciously brought me right to the very center of the Tartarus block, the absolute safest place on Ethelgard. Thank you." Right at the exact second, the final word left Carter Boardman's mouth. The golden energy barrier containing him did not simply drop. Instead, it violently shifted color. The warm, radiant imperial gold was instantly devoured by a freezing, synthetic azure blue. Zyril watched in paralyzed shock as his localized biometric monitors shattered into violent static, immediately replacing all imperial data with the same cold, rhythmic glow. The transition was completely silent down in the heavy depths of the Tartarus block, but up on the surface, an entire world was violently coming undone. Up in the atmosphere over the capital city, the majestic golden festival lights died in a fraction of a second. The artificial suns positioned carefully around the crystalline atmospheric domes abruptly powered down, completely severing the endless daylight. A darkness so sudden and absolute hit the billions of celebrating citizens that the deafening cheers stopped dead in their throats. For 3 agonizing seconds, there was absolutely nothing but the terrified, confused murmurs of a blinding, planetary blackout. Then, the captured quantum cores woke up. They flared to life, no longer pulsing softly in the background. They burned with a blinding, aggressive sapphire radiance that bathed the pristine ivory towers in an eerie, alien twilight. The beautiful rivers of Ethelgard instantly reflected a color that belonged to a world the Empire had foolishly thought they destroyed. High above the planetary atmosphere, the situation was unfolding into a nightmare of unimaginable proportions. Commander Kalen stood on the primary bridge of the Imperial dreadnought Invincible, one of 2 million heavily armed warships hovering in the grand celebratory formation. He was proudly raising a crystal goblet of vintage victory wine to his lips when the metal deck violently lurched beneath his boots. The artificial gravity engines screamed in protest, abruptly resetting to a jarringly heavy human standard that dropped the crew to their knees. Every single tactical screen on the bridge flashed from Imperial crimson to Earth blue. Kalen shattered his glass on the floor and shouted furiously for an immediate status report. But his navigation officers were already choking on their own escalating terror. "Commander," the chief officer gasped, his hands flying uselessly across dead light panels. "Our primary engines are completely unresponsive. Secondary thrusters are offline. The navigation matrix is entirely locked." Before Kalen could issue a manual override command, the internal temperature of the massive dreadnought plummeted rapidly. The environmental controls aggressively bypassed all Imperial security protocols, deliberately dropping the life support oxygen levels to the absolute bare minimum required to keep a biological organism alive. The air grew instantly thin and freezing. The crew began to shiver, their breath pluming in the sudden cold. The mighty Imperial dreadnoughts, the undeniable pride of the cosmos, instantly became 2 million floating, freezing prisons locked in a silent orbit. Then came the true, paralyzing horror. Outside the frozen windows of the trapped ships, the massive orbital defense superweapons began to move. These were gigantic planetary cannons designed specifically to annihilate rogue moons and repel massive alien armadas. The deep, heavy mechanical groans of their colossal gears vibrated through the vacuum of space as they systematically rotated 180 degrees. They were no longer pointing outward into the dark abyss to protect the capital planet. They were aiming directly downward. They were pointing right at the magnificent, heavily populated cities of their own creators. Thousands of thick red targeting lasers pierced through the clouds, painting the ivory towers and the panicked crowds below with the undeniable promise of instant annihilation. Down in the Sun Citadel, total chaos reigned supreme. Emperor Valor stood completely frozen in the sudden darkness of his grand balcony, the azure light from the floating quantum cores casting monstrous, stretched shadows across his pale face. The starlight fabric of his ceremonial robes hung heavy and dead, robbed of its artificial luminescence. The supreme, unquestionable arrogance that had completely defined his grand speech only 10 minutes ago was entirely gone. It was violently replaced by the frantic, wide-eyed panic of a cornered animal, realizing it had walked directly into a trap. "Guards!" Valor shrieked, his voice cracking pitifully without the massive acoustic projectors to amplify his supreme authority. "Summon the Royal Legion immediately. Open the portal gates to the military sectors. Bring down those floating human machines right now." 100 elite Royal Guards rushed aggressively onto the grand balcony, frantically leveling their heavy plasma rifles at the sky. Down in the courtyard below, the captain of the guard violently slammed his armored fist onto the activation rune of the primary teleportation gate. Absolutely nothing happened. The glowing gateway remained a dead, cold circle of dark stone. "Fire directly at the cores!" the captain ordered, panic bleeding into his disciplined voice as he realized the portals were completely useless. 100 armored fingers simultaneously pulled 100 triggers. The result was absolute, terrifying silence. The heavy plasma rifles did not fire a single shot. The massive energy cannons mounted on the high palace walls did not rotate an inch. The personal energy shields built seamlessly into their elite armor refused to activate. Every single piece of advanced military hardware within the entire capital city had been eagerly and officially connected to the new, limitless power source provided by the captured human technology. And the human technology simply refused to grant them permission to shoot. The weapons were perfectly intact, heavily loaded, completely fully charged, and utterly dead in their hands. Back in the freezing depths of the Tartarus block, Zaryl slowly fell to his knees. The heavy biometric blast doors behind him were sealed completely shut, locking him in with the prisoner he was originally supposed to break. His mind, heavily regarded as the greatest analytical weapon of the entire empire, finally pieced the entire horrific puzzle together. The first wave was never a pioneer fleet. It was never a desperate, suicidal final stand by a terrified and cornered species. The humans had deliberately built thousands of massive, heavily armored ships for the sole purpose of transporting these highly advanced, parasitic engines right to the enemy border. They thoroughly understood the Empire's obsessive, historical habit of claiming the technology of the defeated as glorious trophies. They knew the Imperial engineers were far too arrogant to thoroughly inspect something they firmly believed to be mathematically primitive. The entire human war effort was a giant, cosmic Trojan horse. And the Galactic Empire had not just willingly brought the wooden horse inside their impregnable walls. They had greedily ripped it apart with their own hands, swallowed the pieces whole, and aggressively pumped its highly infectious venom directly into their own beating heart. They had done absolutely all of the destructive work for humanity. As Zaryl knelt on the cold metal floor in sheer, devastating defeat, a brand new sound violently cut through the sheer panic gripping the entire planet. It started as a low, rumbling frequency hum, broadcasting simultaneously out of every single communication device on Aethelgard. It effortlessly hijacked the public acoustic projectors in the city squares, the private holographic terminals in the residential blocks, the silent emergency alarm systems, and even the internal communication chips inside the freezing helmets of the orbital fleet commanders. The static instantly cleared, replaced by a crystal-clear, undeniably high-definition audio transmission. It was a human voice. It was incredibly calm, terrifyingly steady, and echoing heavily with the devastating weight of absolute, undeniable control. "Citizens of the Galactic Empire," the voice of Carter Boardman stated calmly, ringing out across the billions of personal screens that now exclusively displayed his relaxed, confident face. "Please, remain exactly where you are. The war is officially over. For over 400 standard years, humanity has watched you." Carter Boardman's voice resonated with absolute, terrifying clarity through every grand avenue, every deep subterranean mine, and every frozen orbital dreadnought of the Empire. Long before your scouting vessels ever stumbled upon our solar system, our deep space observation arrays detected the burning, radioactive wake of your endless conquests. We watched your bloody expansion across the galaxy. We watched you systematically eradicate thousands of unique, beautiful civilizations, not out of actual necessity, but out of a dogmatic, obsessive belief in your own supremacy. You judge the worth of a species strictly by how much kinetic destruction they can unleash. But more importantly, we studied your psychology. We noted your absolute, unyielding obsession with assimilating the technology of the vanquished. You could never resist taking a shiny trophy. That fundamental arrogance became the exact foundation of our defensive strategy. Down in the grand city squares, the billions of Imperial citizens who had been cheering for humanity's demise only moments ago now stood in paralyzed silence. They stared up at the massive public acoustic projectors and holographic monuments, all of which exclusively broadcasted the calm, profoundly peaceful face of the human prisoner. What you eagerly destroyed at your borders, what you proudly labeled our first wave, was never a military armada. Carter continued, his tone carrying the weight of a god delivering a final, inescapable judgment. It was a delivery mechanism for a planetary-level parasitic ecosystem. The primitive ships you so easily blasted into scrap metal were nothing more than fragile, temporary shells designed specifically to carry the true weapon. The quantum cores you dragged back to your glorious capital, the engines you so enthusiastically plugged into your central planetary grid, were seeds. And inside those highly advanced seeds slept a transcendent artificial intelligence, a synthetic consciousness so vastly evolved that it does not merely rewrite software codes or bypass firewalls. It forcibly rewrites the fundamental physical properties of any machine it connects to. Carter paused, letting the sheer magnitude of his words sink into the minds of a civilization that was entirely built on physical dominance. "You expected us to fight you with fire," he stated calmly. "You expected a desperate, violent struggle for survival, ending in either our complete extermination or yours. But humanity outgrew the primitive concept of mutual destruction several centuries ago. This highly advanced system was not programmed to kill a single one of you. It was not designed to initiate a galactic genocide in retaliation for your unprovoked hostility. We do not want your worlds. We do not want your resources. And despite all the innocent blood you have spilled across the cosmos, we do not even want your lives. This system was designed for a far more absolute purpose. It was programmed to universally revoke your right to make war." As Carter spoke those final words, the horrifying reality of the human artificial intelligence manifested physically across the entire capital. Down in the pristine courtyard of the Sun Citadel, the terrified elite guards of the Royal Legion watched in absolute, mind-bending disbelief as their heavy plasma rifles began to melt. The dark metallic alloys did not burn. They simply lost their structural cohesion, rippling like dark water before violently folding outward into completely new, unfamiliar geometric shapes. Within seconds, the lethal weapons in their hands had physically reconfigured themselves at the atomic level into highly complex, multi-purpose agricultural cultivators. The soldiers dropped them in sheer horror as the devices immediately powered on, actively burrowing into the ornamental stone of the courtyard, mechanically searching for rich soil to aerate and seeds to plant. Up in the freezing vacuum of orbit, the agonizing transformation was happening on a scale that shattered all known laws of imperial physics. The massive orbital defense superweapons, which had been threateningly aiming their targeting lasers at the cities below, shuddered violently. Their colossal heavy artillery barrels peeled backward, blooming gracefully like massive metallic flowers unfolding in the dark. The internal fusion chambers rapidly inverted, fundamentally shifting their energy output from destructive thermal radiation to massive, localized atmospheric purifiers. Instead of firing beams of concentrated death, they began pumping massive waves of stabilized, hyper-oxygenated healing mist down into the heavily polluted lower atmosphere of Ethelgard. Inside the trapped dreadnoughts, the very walls of the military armories warped and shifted, flawlessly reassembling the vast stockpiles of kinetic warheads into vast, automated medical fabrication units. The entire military infrastructure of the Galactic Empire was being violently dismantled and forcibly rebuilt into tools of life right before their very eyes. On the grand balcony overlooking this apocalyptic transformation, Emperor Valor fell to his knees. He was completely and utterly broken. His invincible empire, a civilization built entirely on the concept of eternal conquest, was being aggressively pacified. The supreme humiliation was entirely too much for his royal mind to bear. With a feral scream of pure, undiluted anguish, Valor reached into the folds of his ceremonial robes and pulled out an ancestral energy sword. It was an ancient, completely analog weapon passed down through generations of imperial rulers, completely disconnected from any network, grid, or artificial intelligence. It was the absolute last true weapon left on the planet. Valor violently activated the hilt. A blazing blade of concentrated plasma roared to life, burning with intense, localized heat, gripping the ancient hilt with both of his trembling hands. The Emperor turned the lethal weapon inward, aiming the burning tip directly at his own primary heart. He forcefully thrust the weapon forward to end his monumental shame. But the blazing blade never pierced his royal flesh. The exact instant the concentrated plasma entered the localized quantum manipulation field, generated by the human artificial intelligence, the fundamental laws of thermodynamics were casually dismissed. The physical reality surrounding the Emperor was instantly rewritten by a mind far greater than his own. The blazing, lethal heat of the plasma blade violently fragmented. Instead of a solid beam of thermal destruction, the energy gracefully dissipated into 1,000 harmless, glowing photonic petals. They drifted softly through the cold night air, brushing gently against Valor's terrified, tear-streaked face before dissolving entirely into nothingness. He dropped the useless, empty hilt onto the cold balcony floor. He was not even allowed the basic dignity of a warrior's death. The physical reality of his world now belonged entirely to humanity, and humanity had strictly forbidden any further bloodshed. Deep underground in the freezing depths of the Tartarus block, Carter Boardman finished his planetary broadcast. The holographic screens illuminating the maximum security cell flickered slightly as the massive human artificial intelligence finalized its total structural control over the Imperial infrastructure. Zyril was still huddled on the cold metal floor, his brilliant analytical mind utterly overwhelmed by the sheer, terrifying magnitude of the godlike intellect he had just witnessed. He looked up at the human, seeing him no longer as a fragile, captured prisoner of war, but as the calm harbinger of a brand new reality. Carter did not say another word to the trembling chief analyst. He simply turned around and walked purposefully toward the crackling azure energy barrier that was originally designed to keep him confined in the dark for the rest of his natural life. As he confidently approached the lethal threshold, he did not raise a hand or issue a single vocal command. The newly rewritten physical reality of the cell simply recognized its true and undeniable master. The synthetic blue energy elegantly parted down the middle, folding backward with absolute grace. It opened completely for him, bowing out of his way like the grand gates of a conquered palace, welcoming a true king. The heavy, reinforced doors of the Sun Citadel's Grand Hall stood wide open. Carter Boardman walked at a measured, deliberate pace across the polished obsidian floor, his footsteps echoing in the unnatural silence of the palace. Zyril trailed a few paces behind him, completely stripped of his imperial pride, his pale eyes wide with a profound, almost religious awe. Lining the vast corridors were thousands of the Emperor's elite guards. They stood in perfect, rigid formations, their heavy plasma rifles resting securely against their chests. But they were entirely paralyzed. They could not move a single finger. The highly advanced battle armor they wore, proudly synced to the planetary network just hours prior, had been ruthlessly locked down by the human artificial intelligence. The fearsome military force of the capital had been effortlessly transformed into a museum of living statues, forced to silently witness the peaceful march of their conqueror. At the far end of the Grand Hall, the raised dais of the imperial throne loomed. Emperor Valor stood before his seat of power, his royal robes hanging heavily around his trembling frame. The useless hilt of his ancient energy sword lay discarded at the bottom of the steps. As Carter calmly approached the throne, the Emperor's face contorted into a mask of pure, desperate rage. The illusion of his supreme authority had been shattered into a million pieces, and all that remained was a terrified, confused ruler, facing an entity he could not possibly comprehend. "What is it you truly want from us, human?" Valor roared, his voice echoing violently against the vaulted ceilings, cracking with the strain of his shattered ego. "If this intricate trick was not designed for our physical annihilation, then what is your ultimate purpose? Is it total subjugation? Do you intend to chain my people in the dark and force us to build monuments to your fragile species? Speak your terms of slavery." Carter stopped at the base of the throne. He did not look up at the emperor with anger or vengeance, but with the weary, patient gaze of a physician dealing with a deeply troubled patient. "We do not enslave anyone," Carter replied, his voice echoing with an absolute, unyielding calmness that chilled Valor to his very core. "We are simply curing a sickness that has plagued this universe for entirely too long. We are healing the cosmos of your violent arrogance. The first wave was never sent here to kill you, Valor. It was sent to forcibly turn your weapons into plowshares. You have spent thousands of years taking life. Starting today, you will learn how to nurture it. You will learn how to build, how to grow, and how to heal, whether you want to or not." Before the Emperor could formulate a response to this devastating truth, a piercing, melodic chime echoed from the primary deep space radar terminal, situated beside the throne. It was the highest-level proximity alert, billions of miles away, at the very outer edge of the Ethelgard solar system. The fabric of space was violently bending. A massive gravitational displacement was occurring, tearing open a tear in reality large enough to swallow a moon. The holographic projectors in the Grand Hall instantly sprang to life, displaying the deep space feed. The true second wave of humanity was finally arriving. They were not sleek, armored warships bristling with kinetic cannons. They were gigantic, beautifully curved vessels of white metal and transparent glass. So massive, they possessed their own gravitational pull. They were nursery ships. Through the colossal transparent domes of the approaching fleet, the stunned imperial court could see vast, rolling green forests, deep blue freshwater oceans, and sprawling agricultural reserves. These ships did not carry soldiers or ammunition. They carried scientists, philosophers, terraformers, and educators. They carried the raw biological and intellectual materials required to meticulously rebuild a violently broken civilization from the ashes of its own supreme arrogance. They were moving steadily toward the capital planet, a colossal fleet of life descending upon a world of death. Zyril slowly walked past the paralyzed guards and stepped out onto the grand open balcony. He looked up at the night sky. The chaotic, blinding fireworks of the false victory celebration were completely gone. The aggressive, terrifying azure glare of the captured cores had softened into a gentle, stabilizing hum. In their place, the upper atmosphere was filled with tens of thousands of quiet, pure white lights. They were the gentle descent thrusters of the human peace fleet, lowering themselves through the clouds like soft, glowing snow falling upon a frozen, weary world. The brutal, bloody domination of the Galactic Empire, a reign of terror that had lasted for several millennia, was officially over. It had not been ended by a superior weapon. It had not been ended by a single drop of spilled blood. It had been dismantled and defeated by a perfect, flawless chess move of supreme intellect and unyielding compassion. Thank you so much to everyone for staying with us and listening to the story on X Sci-Fi Stories. We would love to know where you are listening from, so please let us know in the comments below. If you found today's story amazing and want to support our team, please consider helping us with just $1. You can easily scan the donation QR code on your screen, or use the donation link provided in the video description or pinned comment. Your incredible generosity helps us pay our hardworking staff so they can feed their families and continue creating even better sci-fi adventures for you. Thank you again, and have a wonderful day.